Oh, hello. I'm Eric from Let's Get. It's been just over 4 years since I did my quickie review of Kid Icarus in my Valentine's Day special, available to watch now on RetroTV.com. One thing I briefly brought up in the review is that there was a sequel, but I didn't really talk about it. The other thing I mentioned was that since the main character Pit was in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, shouldn't the long-awaited sequel be on the horizon? Well, it may have been an obvious call, but sure enough, Kid Icarus Uprising is scheduled to come out for the 3ds this month, so I thought it would be appropriate to finally go back and do a quickie review of the sequel to Kid Icarus. Kid Icarus, the Kidikering. Okay, just kidding. Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters for the Game Boy. Wait, what's up with the cover art? Definitely not as nostalgic as the old-school NES American box art if you ask me, but that's not what I'm talking about. What's up with the snake and eggplant wizard? First of all, they're not even interested in Pit at all, and they're giving each other this seductive look. The eggplant wizard is even pointing at the snake with a come slither stare. Come here, you. Who, me? I think there's a little something going on behind the scenes, if you know what I mean. Anyway, this is a Game Quickie, so let's go, Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. The game's story goes like this. A long time ago in Angel Land, the goddess Palutena had a terrible dream and called a fortune teller to unravel the dream. The fortune teller said that Angel Land would be attacked by demons called Orcos. Palutena summons Pit, the hero of the last game and the leader of the Icarus army. She tells Pit of her dream and the fortune teller's prediction, and tells him to begin training so that he can gain special magical powers that will allow him to wear the 3 sacred treasures needed to defeat Orcos. Sound familiar? So basically, it plays almost exactly the same as Kid Icarus for the NES. Obvious differences not even worth mentioning are that it's on the Game Boy, so the screen can get a bit tight and cluttered at times, and of course it's in black and white. Oh, I guess I just mentioned those obvious differences not worth mentioning. The graphics are quite good for a Game Boy game, of course, and the sprites are nice and big, hence the close-up cluttered view. But this was common in games like this on the Game Boy, and the view is comparable to Metroid 2 among other games. The music is also quite good, and it's very reminiscent of the original. There are actually some improvements to the original. For one thing, Pit can actually use his wings a bit from the beginning of the game by flapping them to control his descent. You can also fly short distances when you pick up a feather. Now of course you can't actually fly for reals until the end just like in the first one, but you actually have to tap the A button to fly, unlike the first one. The power-ups and health are more plentiful, so it's not as unnecessarily difficult as the first one in that respect. Kid Icarus moves a bit differently on the Game Boy. It doesn't wrap from left to right like in the first one, it's actually one big scrolling loop. The first time I played this I didn't realize that, and I just thought it was a really huge map. Also, the ground you've covered doesn't become a giant pitfall behind you, so you're free to go back if you miss something, and it's less punishing if you miss a platform. The controls are actually a bit better than the NES version, I'd say, because Pit doesn't take that extra step when he lands, and it just feels tighter overall. Some other differences are that there are hidden rooms in this game, and when Pit dies, instead of just falling to his doom, he sheds his mortal coil. Literally. Other than that, if you've played the first Kid Icarus, you know the drill. You collect hearts as currency, and you can buy items that are once again way too expensive. You can also collect hearts in the bat chambers and play the game of chance. The training rooms from the first game are back, and you can get weapon upgrades this way. They're still hard as heck, but now the last training areas are actually way too easy because you can just fly above the onslaught in the later levels. If you're cheap. You're being measured behind the scenes based on unexplained criteria like defeating a minimum number of enemies to see if you're worthy of leveling up or not. Oh yeah, and it still has those damn sticky talon like characters that steal your stuff. So frustrating. The level structure and progression of the game is also the same as the original more or less. Most of the levels are vertical scrolling except for the side-scrolling overworld and the dungeons, which are big mazes like in Zelda. So once again, the objective is to obtain the 3 sacred treasures, except this time you're not trying to defeat Medusa, but the demon Orcos who has invaded the kingdom of Angel Land. In order to achieve this goal, you'll have to get through 3 main stages, each with 4 levels, the 4th being the final dungeon of the stage. This is where you find each of the sacred treasures. Palutena in all her wisdom has sealed 1 treasure away with each boss. You know, for safekeeping, and for training purposes. Nice one. Now, I know I said this game is generally easier than the original, but to me it seems like the bosses are a bit harder because they take like 1,000 hits each. Approximately. The difficulty of the bosses, of course, will vary depending on how much you've leveled up. When you finally get through the underworld and the overworld, you'll reach the Sky Tower. This is where you'll be able to use the 3 sacred treasures if you've done well in your training throughout the game, but if not, you won't be able to use all of them unless you earn them in the training rooms. Have you trained hard enough to defeat Orcos in the final battle? Well, it's too late to go back now, so I hope you have. Oh, and the ending's pretty weird too. This game is pretty short and will probably only take you 2 to 3 hours to beat. The replay value is decent because you'll probably find something hidden that you didn't know about on your first playthrough. I actually thought I had this game in my massive collection of games, but I either can't find it or I never actually owned it in the first place, so I had to buy it online. The game is fairly inexpensive online, and I think I picked it up for like 14 bucks on Amazon.com. Well, I got my wish and the sequel is finally coming out soon on the 3ds. Like everyone else, I fully expected it to come out on the Wii, but hey, I'm down with the 3DS. Speaking of the 3ds, I love their Virtual Console. There are lots of great games throughout the store, and while the Virtual Console is limited right now, there are some great games there. Maybe with the new Kid Icarus release, we'll see Kid Icarus 2 on there. Come on, Nintendo, the timing would be great. It would probably be going for $3.99 based on previous releases, and I'd say it's well worth it if you're a fan of Kid Icarus or you just want to play a good handheld platform adventure game. Now, Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, the sequel, came out about 5 years after the original, but unlike the original, it was surprisingly not released in Japan. The next game in the series is supposed to come out in 2012, 25 years since the original and a long 20 years since the sequel. That's quite a gap between titles. I'm really excited to see the next installment in this series, and I'm very glad that it's coming out, especially since it's been 20 years since the last Kid Icarus release. I'll see you next time on another Take Wing!